The moment you start feeling that gnawing confusion in your stomach, the kind where you can't quite tell where you stand with a man, it's time to step back and look at the situation with clear eyes. Players rely on your emotions clouding your judgment. They thrive when you are so wrapped up in wondering what's going on that you stop seeing the obvious. The truth is, inconsistency is not an accident, it's a tactic. When someone gives you just enough attention to keep you hooked, but never enough to make you feel secure, they are playing a game. Most women in this situation pour more of themselves into the connection, thinking they can win him over if they just give a little more. That's exactly what he's counting on. But the power shift happens the moment you stop trying to solve him like a puzzle and instead accept that his behavior is the answer. Mixed signals are his favorite weapon because they keep you emotionally invested while keeping him in control. One day he's showering you with attention. The next he's distant and cold. You start questioning yourself, wondering if you did something wrong, when in reality, you're reacting exactly how he wants. Every unanswered text, every delayed response, every vague promise is a calculated move to keep you chasing. When you don't recognize the pattern, you start dancing to his rhythm, adjusting your moods to his availability. The cycle becomes addictive because the highs feel so intoxicating, and the lows make you crave the highs even more. But the way out is to see this dynamic for what it is. Not a romance with bad timing, but a setup designed to keep you in limbo. The reason so many women stay in these situations is because of hope. Hope that the sweet version of him, the one who made you feel seen and special, will come back. Players know this, so they sprinkle just enough of that version in to keep you believing. But here's the truth. The good moments are not a glimpse of his real self. That's hidden under the games. The games are his real self. Those sweet moments are bait. The sooner you stop idealizing his potential and start focusing on his consistent actions, the sooner you remove yourself from the trap. He may say all the right things when he senses you pulling away, but words without consistent follow through are just another layer of manipulation. When you recognize the game, the goal is not to get better at playing it. The goal is to step out entirely. You do this by refusing to emotionally invest in someone who's under-investing in you. That might mean slowing down your responses, prioritizing your own plans, and no longer rearranging your life around his unpredictability. This doesn't mean you become cold or rude. It means you stop rewarding inconsistency with your time and energy. When he realizes his usual tactics aren't working, he will either escalate to get your attention or drift away to find someone else to play with. Either way, you've broken the cycle that keeps you trapped. The moment you step back, you give yourself the gift of perspective. You start to see patterns you couldn't see when you were emotionally tangled. You notice that his big efforts always happen right after he senses you slipping away. You notice how his words rarely match his long-term behavior. And you start to understand that his unpredictability isn't a flaw to fix. It's a deliberate choice. Players count on you being too caught up in the connection to analyze it objectively. But once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. That's where your power begins to grow. The beauty of refusing to play is that it makes you untouchable to men who rely on manipulation. They can only play with you if you agree to the game. When you remove your emotional availability from someone who's abusing it, you force them into a position they're not used to, one where they have to either show up consistently or lose access to you entirely. For many players, that's too much work and they'll move on to an easier target. That might sting at first, but in reality, it's the best possible outcome. You're left with your self-respect intact and your time freed up for someone who will value it. Recognizing the game is also about recognizing your worth. When you truly understand that you deserve consistency, effort, and respect, the behavior of a player becomes unattractive instead of alluring. That shift in mindset is what keeps you from falling into the same traps over and over. Instead of wondering how to keep his attention, you start asking yourself whether his attention is even worth having. That one question can save you months, even years, of wasted emotional energy. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes to walk away from anyone who doesn't align with your standards. You have to remember, players don't pick women because those women are less than. They often target strong, beautiful, Intelligent women precisely because they want the challenge of seeing if they can pull them into the game. That's why recognizing the game is so important. It's not about doubting yourself. It's about protecting yourself. Just because someone chooses to play doesn't mean you have to sit at the table. The real win is in leaving them to their own games while you invest your energy in building the kind of love and life you actually want. Once you can spot these patterns early, you won't waste time on men who operate this way. You'll see the red flags not as mysterious puzzles, but as clear signs to exit. And in doing so, you make room for the kind of man who doesn't keep you guessing. The one who shows up, stays consistent, and values your heart without conditions. That clarity is the ultimate way to outsmart any man who's playing with you. Because the smartest move you can make in a game you didn't sign up for is to walk away entirely. Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful tools you can have when dealing with someone who plays with your heart. It's not about shutting down your feelings or pretending you don't care, but about not allowing another person's inconsistency to control your emotions. Players thrive on the emotional roller coaster they create because it keeps you hooked. They know that if they can make you feel euphoric one day and anxious the next, you'll keep chasing those moments of validation. Detachment breaks that pattern. It allows you to observe his behavior without being consumed by it. When you can watch his actions and think, that's interesting, instead of, what's wrong with me, you've already taken a massive step toward reclaiming your power. Most women believe that showing how much they care will inspire a man to step up. But with a player, the opposite is true. The more emotionally invested you appear, the more he knows he can get away with. He'll push boundaries just to see if you'll still be there. Emotional detachment flips the script because it removes the safety net he's been relying on. Suddenly, your mood isn't dictated by his texts. Your self-worth isn't tied to his compliments, and your day doesn't revolve around his attention. This unpredictability shifts the dynamic. Now he's the one wondering how you feel, what you're thinking, and whether he still has the same influence over you. Detachment also allows you to make decisions based on reality, not fantasy. When you're deeply entangled emotionally, you start justifying bad behavior because you're clinging to the version of him you wish he was. You excuse his disappearing acts because you remember that one amazing date where you felt so connected. You overlook his lack of effort because you believe he has potential. But when you detach, you see things for what they are in the present moment. You stop giving him credit for possibilities and start holding him accountable for his actions today. This clarity is what helps you stop negotiating with the bare minimum and start expecting more. It's important to understand that emotional detachment doesn't mean playing hard to get. Playing games is exactly what a player wants because it keeps you in his world. Detachment is different. It's a genuine internal shift where you no longer seek his approval to feel secure. You're not pretending to be busy. You're actually busy living your life. You're not delaying your reply to manipulate him. You're simply not prioritizing someone who doesn't prioritize you. This authenticity is what makes detachment so powerful. It's not a tactic. It's a way of protecting your emotional health. One of the most effective ways to build emotional detachment is by redirecting your focus. When you stop making him the center of your emotional universe, you naturally start reclaiming your energy. You spend more time with friends, dive into hobbies, set new personal goals. You invest in yourself so fully that his inconsistency feels less important because your happiness is no longer dependent on his presence. Players hate this shift because they can sense when you're no longer emotionally tethered to them. They lose the control they once had, and many will either try harder or vanish altogether. Either outcome is a win for you. Detachment also gives you emotional resilience. The truth is, when you care deeply for someone who doesn't treat you well, their actions can feel like personal attacks. But with detachment, you start to see that their behavior says more about them than it does about you. If he disappears, you don't spiral into self-blame. You recognize that it's a reflection of his character, not your worth. This mindset frees you from the exhausting cycle of overthinking and allows you to respond with calm confidence instead of emotional chaos. Another key benefit of detachment is that it creates an air of mystery. When you're constantly available and emotionally reactive, he knows exactly how to keep you hooked. But when you detach, he no longer has that same map to your emotions. He can't predict your every move, and that uncertainty forces him to either step up or fade away. A man who's genuinely interested will rise to meet your emotional independence. A player will find it too much effort and reveal his true intentions faster. It's worth noting that detachment doesn't happen overnight. If you've been deeply invested, it will take conscious effort to stop reacting emotionally to every little thing he does or doesn't do. You might have to remind yourself daily that your value isn't defined by how much attention he gives you. You may need to physically create space, fewer texts, less social media stalking, more time focused on your own life. Each small step reinforces the message to yourself that you come first, not his unpredictable behavior. The beauty of mastering emotional detachment is that it doesn't just protect you from one player. It changes the way you approach relationships entirely. You become someone who no longer tolerates being kept in limbo. You stop chasing people who give you mixed signals because you're anchored in your own worth. You attract men who appreciate your self-possession and respect your boundaries. And when someone tries to play games, they quickly realize you're not a participant. When you combine emotional detachment with self-respect, you're untouchable in the best way possible. You stop waiting for someone to treat you right and start living in a way that demands it by default. The men who can't match that energy will quietly fall away, leaving space for the ones who can. In the end, detachment isn't about caring less. It's about caring more for yourself than for someone's inconsistent attention. And that is the kind of power that no player can take away from you. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define what you will and won't tolerate. And when dealing with a man who's playing with your heart, those lines have to be crystal clear. The problem is, many women set boundaries in theory, but don't follow through in practice. They say they won't accept last-minute cancellations, disappearing acts, or disrespect. But when it happens, they let it slide because they don't want to seem difficult or push him away. The reality is, failing to enforce your boundaries doesn't keep him close. It tells him he can treat you however he wants and still have access to you. Players thrive when there are no consequences for their actions because it means they can keep getting the benefits of your time, affection, and attention without putting in the effort. When you set boundaries that bite, you send a clear message that you value yourself enough to walk away from anything less than you deserve. It's not about punishment or manipulation. It's about self-respect. If he cancels on you at the last minute, you don't rearrange your schedule to accommodate his next available time. If he disappears for days without explanation, you don't welcome him back like nothing happened. Each time you let a violation slide, you train him to believe that your boundaries are negotiable. But each time you stand firm, you train him to see that access to you is a privilege he has to earn. This is how you shift the balance of power in your favor. Boundaries are most effective when they're paired with consistency. If you enforce them sometimes but not others, the message becomes muddled. A player will test you again and again to see if you're serious, especially if he senses that your feelings for him are strong. That's why it's crucial to decide in advance what behaviors are deal breakers for you, and to stick to them no matter how much you like him or how good he makes you feel in the moment. The more consistent you are, the less room there is for him to manipulate the situation or convince you to compromise your standards. One of the biggest mistakes women make when setting boundaries is over-explaining. You don't have to justify why you won't tolerate certain behavior. You don't need to write him a novel about how hurt you were or try to make him understand your perspective. Boundaries aren't about getting him to agree with you. They're about making a decision for yourself and standing by it. The moment you start negotiating your worth or pleading for respect, you've already weakened your position. Instead, state your boundary simply and let your actions do the talking. There's also a misconception that strong boundaries will scare a good man away. The truth is, the only men who run from clear boundaries are the ones who plan to violate them. A man who's genuinely interested and emotionally mature will respect and even appreciate your standards because it shows him that you have self-respect. Players, on the other hand, will see boundaries as an obstacle to their games, and they'll either try to break them down or leave. Either way, the boundary does its job. It filters out the wrong men and makes room for the right ones. It's important to remember that boundaries are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about controlling your own response. You can't stop a man from ghosting you, but you can choose not to re-engage with someone who disappears without explanation. You can't force him to keep his word, but you can choose to stop making plans with someone who repeatedly cancels. The power of boundaries lies in your willingness to remove yourself from situations that violate your standards. That's where your leverage comes from. Players often test boundaries subtly at first. They might start with small things, being a little late, taking a little longer to reply, making slightly suggestive comments to other women in front of you. If you let those slide, the violations grow bigger over time. That's why it's critical to address disrespect early, before it becomes a pattern. The first time he pushes the line, calmly and confidently hold your ground. The earlier you enforce a boundary, the less likely he is to test it again. And if he does, you already know he's not someone who respects you enough to stay in your life. Enforcing boundaries can be uncomfortable, especially if you're used to people pleasing or avoiding conflict. But every time you choose yourself, respect over temporary comfort, you build inner strength. You prove to yourself that you can survive the discomfort of saying no and still be okay. This self-trust is invaluable because it means you'll never have to stay in a situation that makes you feel small or undervalued. It's the foundation of a healthy relationship with yourself, which is the first step to having healthy relationships with others. When you set boundaries that bite, you stop being someone who's easily swayed by charm or chemistry alone. You become someone who evaluates a man's worthiness based on his consistent behavior, not just his words or potential. You make it clear that you're not interested in being an option, a backup plan, or a convenience. This doesn't just protect your heart. It commands respect from anyone who interacts with you. And that respect is the foundation of any relationship worth having. The more you practice enforcing boundaries, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, you won't even have to think about it. You'll simply walk away from anything that doesn't align with your standards. You'll stop fearing that you'll lose someone by standing your ground, because you'll know that anyone worth having in your life won't put you in a position where you have to compromise your dignity. Boundaries are your silent superpower, and when you use them with confidence, you'll never have to worry about outsmarting a man who's playing games, because he won't even get the chance to start. The reason so many women end up feeling drained in situations with players is because they're unknowingly chasing the wrong thing. They're chasing his attention instead of making him rise to their standard. Attention is cheap. Anyone can give it for a moment, especially a man who knows how to charm. Standards, on the other hand, require real effort. When you shift your focus from getting him to notice you to requiring him to meet your expectations, the entire dynamic changes. You're no longer hoping he picks you. You're deciding whether he's worth picking. This flips the power balance and forces him to earn his place in your life, instead of assuming it's already guaranteed. Players are skilled at making women feel special just enough to keep them invested, but they rarely back that up with consistent action. When you're focused on your standard, you stop accepting words as proof of interest. You start looking for evidence in the way he shows up for you over time. Does he follow through on promises? Does he make plans and stick to them? Does he prioritize your feelings and respect your boundaries? If the answer is no, then no amount of charm should be enough to sway you. A man can say he cares, but if his actions show otherwise, your standard should make it clear that he doesn't get the privilege of your time. The beauty of leading with your standard is that it naturally filters out the men who are only in it for the game. They'll quickly realize that you can't be impressed by surface, level gestures and shallow compliments. Instead, you value consistency, reliability, and emotional maturity. A player's usual tricks won't work because you won't reward them. He might try harder at first to break through your resolve, but if his interest isn't genuine, he'll tire of the effort and reveal himself. That's a win for you, because you've saved yourself months or years of frustration by letting him disqualify himself early. Making a man chase your standard also requires that you're crystal clear on what that standard is. You can't enforce what you haven't defined. Take the time to decide what you truly value in a partner, not just qualities like kindness or ambition, but specific behaviors that prove those qualities are real. For example, kindness might look like him being considerate of your time, listening when you speak, and showing up when you need support. When you know exactly what you expect, it's much harder for someone to distract you with grand gestures that don't align with your core needs. A common fear is that having high standards will scare men away, but here's the truth, it will only scare away the wrong ones. The right man will see your standard as an invitation to rise to the occasion, not as an obstacle. In fact, men who are truly ready for a healthy relationship are drawn to women with strong standards because it signals that they're dealing with someone who values herself. Players, on the other hand, will see it as too much work, and that's exactly the point. You're not here to make it easy for someone to play with your heart. You're here to make it easy for the right man to recognize your worth. The shift from chasing attention to enforcing your standard is also an internal one. It's not about putting up a wall or being hard to impress just for the sake of it. It's about genuinely believing that you deserve to be treated with care, respect, and effort, and refusing to accept less. This mindset changes the way you carry yourself. You stop feeling anxious when someone pulls away because you know you won't settle for crumbs. You stop trying to prove your value to someone who's not showing theirs. That confidence is magnetic, and it makes you stand out from the women who are still trying to win the approval of someone who doesn't deserve it. When a man is chasing your standard, he's not just chasing your time. He's chasing the opportunity to meet the requirements that keep him in your life. This forces him to invest emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even logistically in the relationship. It's no longer enough for him to pop in and out when it suits him. If he wants to stay, he has to consistently match the level of respect, effort, and integrity that you've set as non-negotiable. And the moment he stops, you're willing to walk away because your standard is not just for him, it's for you. It's important to note that making him chase your standard doesn't mean being rigid or inflexible. It means knowing your core needs and refusing to compromise on them while still being open to healthy growth and compromise in other areas. Relationships aren't about perfection, but they are about mutual respect and effort. Your standard is the baseline for that effort. Without it, you leave the door open for inconsistent, half-hearted connections that keep you in a cycle of confusion and disappointment. The truth is, a man who's playing games will never chase your standard because doing so requires him to show genuine commitment, and that's not what he's after. This is exactly why having a clear, enforced standard is the ultimate filter. It doesn't just protect you from being played, it ensures that the only men who stick around are the ones who actually want the same kind of relationship you do. By holding firm to your standard, you take control of the pace, the depth, and the direction of the connection. You stop being an option and start being the prize that only the right man can win. When you make him chase your standard, you send a powerful message to yourself and to everyone you meet. You know your worth, and you won't compromise it for temporary attention. That's the difference between being a woman who gets played and being a woman who gets chosen. Players can't survive in the world of high standards because they're not built for consistency. And consistency is the very thing that keeps love alive. When you commit to living by your standard, you'll find that the men who aren't serious will fade quickly, and the ones who will show up ready to match your energy every single time.